Einstein was a bastard. He carefully ruled out all the ways you could mess around with time. Despite generations of scientists doing their best to prove him wrong, we were stuck. Without being able to alter the relative passage of time, we could never get near even to our closest celestial neighbor. Even at best speed, it would that 160,000 years to go there and back again. It was with these thoughts that Professor Regelstump drank away the late evening. He had spent his career carefully finding the limits of the question of time. That had been his thesis some 40 years earlier. Finally, he had an answer. The answer was no. No way round. No shortcuts. No way to reverse it or speed it up unless you could convert an object into a quantum particle, which you couldn't. On his desk sat a 3,000-year-old pot. A small one, it held his pens. It reminded him of the inevitable passage of time. Even the empire that made it was lost. In a very drunken moment, he emptied it out on the desk, poured a whiskey in it, saluted the old gods killed by time, and drank. Then he quietly passed out in his armchair. A dim light suffused the room. Enki set foot on Earth for the first time in many, many years. He regarded this new worshipper. His glance reached a whiteboard covered in familiar math. No wonder the good doctor had sent up a prayer. Stuck, as so many were, on the real world. So many never got past this point. Still, honor had been given to him. He was allowed some small intervention. He wrote the mathematical description later known as the needle on the board. Unfamiliar with the etiquette of whiteboards, he simply carved it in place with a thought. Professor Stump awoke in his armchair. Again. This was the end of his hopes. He would go and face his students and try and hide his despair. Perhaps they would find something that he couldn't. He would face his colleagues and tell them he would not be publishing again. Then he would retire. Then he saw the whiteboard. He later described the moment. I had worked the problem to its logical end. No loopholes. No way round. Then I saw what I had carved into the whiteboard. My subconscious must have been screaming the answer. I have spoken to many psychologists and fellow physics professors, and they say that this sort of thing happens. Apparently Einstein had a moment or two himself. Enki returned to Abzu House. His people has ascended many thousands of years ago. Every so often they would spot someone new pop up in the universe. Sometimes they gave them a head start, sometimes they didn't. The rules were so old, no one even remembered what they were, but you could still answer a request or give someone a nudge. With any luck, they might have some new neighbors in a few thousand years. Something to look forward to. That was rare when eternity stretched ahead of you. The Regal Drive was developed within a century. No one wanted to use his surname for it. The needle ships began leaving the Earth. With time under control, mankind could finally see the stars. Colony ships, explorers, and ne'er-do-wells had a universe to play with. 2,000 years later, mankind had established an empire. The needle ships jumped from one end of the universe to the other. It was filled with life, mostly moss. Still, where there's life, there's hope. Any world that showed a hint of possibility was left strictly alone. Mankind lived mostly between the stars now, occasionally establishing a new world, mostly just flying about with the enthusiasm of a sugar-filled toddler. Deep in the Andromeda Galaxy was to be honest, a middling university on a middling world some 12,000 years later. Professor Adept Harmony, Department of Science History, was looking at the same whiteboard. It didn't happen. You simply can't get from there to here. That isn't his handwriting. Also carved? Who does that? Something else happened. I need to know what. This was the start of the question that came to dominate her field. After several robust discussions, one involving a hand grenade, her position became the official position. The question then became who had gifted the universe to mankind. At least they knew someone else was out there. 8,000 years later, the first human ascended. They were delighted to meet Enki, who still had fond memories of Earth. Loki looked around. A familiar room. A shaman out of his head on the local fungi. Mankind liked these odd lizard types. Time these guys figured out the compass.